Welcome to Better Sex, where you get the information and inspiration to create and enjoy your best possible sex life. Join your host, sex therapist Jessa Zimmerman, as she brings you expert guests, helpful tips, knowledge, and strategies to improve your intimate relationships. And now, your host, Jessa Zimmerman.
Hey everybody, it's Jessa. Welcome back to the Better Sex Podcast for another episode. Thanks so much for tuning in and being part of the crowd. Today's episode, we're going to be talking about menopause, and this is one of the things that comes up as potentially a complicating factor in people's sex lives. So in the first pillar of Intimacy with Ease, which is all about discover what has got you stuck, what is complicating your sex life, and then how to think about it all differently so that you literally can't fail, this is where this would fall. Because women have different experiences with menopause. Some are more impacted than others. For some people, it's a bigger deal than for others, but it can be something that throws a wrench in the works for people. So Dr. Michelle Gordon is here to talk about the changes with menopause, sort of her own journey getting into this work, because she's gone from a surgeon working in medicine to full-time coach and leader of this menopause movement work that she's doing. And she shares a little bit about her journey, but then we're talking about the kinds of impacts people have with menopause and also the kinds of opportunities that this presents us. It can really be a powerful time of life and a place to make some changes that really set you up to be really happy from then on. So it's a very positive thing and really encouraging and cool. I'm excited about it, and I hope you get a lot out of the episode. And before we start the show today, it is sponsored by Intimacy with Ease. It's a method to help otherwise happy couples achieve a sex life that is easy and fun for both of them, so that you can actually just enjoy your sex life with zero stress. For more information, if you want to watch a brief little training video that's available, all of that, go to intimacywithease.com. So thank you so much for being on the show with me.
So happy to be here.
It's fun to trade this since I was on your show and now you're on mine. This is a great partnership. So
I love it. I love it so much.
So talk to me a little bit about the evolution, the history. Where did the menopause movement come from?
So what happened was I started going through menopause a few years ago. I mean, it happens to all of us. But,
yes, it does.
But the problem is that it comes on kind of suddenly and people don't expect it. And for me, there was no different for me. And I started having these weird things happen. I was crying at commercials. I'm not that emotional.
You have not done that before. Okay.
Right, I'm not that emotional. I mean, stupid commercials, like, just crying. And I'm just not emotional. I'm a little bit on the other extreme. I don't get that emotional. And so I was like, this is weird. And then, and then I would be just laying on the couch reading, say. And all of a sudden I would feel like I was embarrassed, like this big flush was coming up, but it felt like, so when I get it, I'm classic. I don't know. When I get embarrassed, I feel this flush go up and I thought, well, this is weird. I'm not embarrassed. Why is this happening? But then the kicker was I gained like 50 pounds and it felt like it was overnight.
Wow.
And I was also like hating everyone. So it's like, this is really bizarre. And so I'm married to a lady. Her name is Val, and she's an internist. And I said to her, what is happening? Because she had a very mellow menopause. I mean, we've been together for 15 years. And so her menopause, she cried a little bit, but that was it.
That was it. Okay.
Never complained about hot flashes or anything like that. I said, what is happening? And she says, well, it's probably menopause. You just got to get through it. And I'm like, this sucks. I gained 50 pounds, and I'm talking about like, how am I going to lose this weight? And then, you just got to wait for it to be over. And so then I started doing research, found out that menopause can last the rest of your life.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's not like over. We're just in it, right?
Yeah,
So,
it doesn't ever go away. And so I started talking to like women who were, 20 years, 30 years older than me, and they're still having symptoms. And I'm like, I am not going to be miserable for the rest of my life. I'm going to figure this out. And I started doing research, and I read probably 100 books, and I started putting these principles into action. I figured out that there's, basically four pillars to managing your menopause. But on top of that, there's some real tricks about behavior change. So I tried taking some hormones. And when I started taking hormones, I got a period, and I was like, nope.
Yeah, I didn't want that.
Nope. Cause I was over that. And what happened was, so I always had maybe some, what we would call dysmorphic. I got really angry around my periods. Mm. So what is that? That's like dysmenorrhea, but dysmorphic dysmenorrhea or something. I just had this really bad, I can't think of the medical term. So I apologize for anyone who's listening, who's a medical person, because I apologize. I can't remember it, but it's like PMDD is the acronym. And so here I am. I was so angry with myself and hated myself so much every time I got a period that I took the pill. And I had no danger of getting pregnant. I had sex with women. Right. So I took the pill, and I never got periods, and it was awesome. So I took this pill that I didn't have to. And then I thought, when I started menopause, I thought, well, let me go off this pill because I don't have to worry about it. I was getting these hot flashes and stuff. And it's like overnight, I got this big fibroid. So I got this big uterine fibroid. So I was having a massage. I was in New York City. We were there for a weekend or something. I was having a massage, and the guy pushed on my belly, and it felt weird. And I put my hand there. I was like, oh my God, there's a mass there. And I'm a surgeon, so I know what it means to have a mass. And I was like, crap. Yeah. And so then I had to go through the whole, rigmarole. And I ended up doing an endometrial biopsy, which, if you haven't ever had an endometrial biopsy, it's like the pain of childbirth without a baby at the end.
Oh gosh.
Because they're scraping the inside. It was horrible. Oh. So I had to have that. And then we did what's called, it's a uterine artery ablation.
Wow.
And so it's a vascular procedure where it was an interventional radiologist, but he put a thing in my artery, and then the fibroid had to degenerate, and that hurt. Ugh. So anyway, I don't know why this story came up, but at the end of the day, if you've ever had a degenerating fibroid, you're going to know what I'm talking about. They hurt because it's tissue that's dying inside of you.
Wow.
And truly the fibroid went up to almost to my sternum. So that's the end of the breastbone there. So it was a big, big fibroid, but it went away. I didn't have to have surgery. That was awesome. But I still had menopause symptoms, and I still had, my clothes fit a little better because I didn't have this big mass in my belly anymore. But at the same time, I wasn't happy with my body. I didn't like what I saw in the mirror. And I did a bunch of trial and error for myself. And when I was able to put all of these principles into action, these 4 pillars that we're going to talk about later, I lost 50 pounds. I felt good about myself. My relationships improved. Mm-hmm. And I looked in the mirror and I was like, oh, yeah, okay, I can live that. Mm-hmm. And that was, I think menopause is so disruptive. It gives us a chance to take stock and say, what is actually happening in our life right now? And it's a time where we can actually reinvent ourselves if we want to, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I don't know if you talk about this with your audience, but it really is an opportunity for us to really take stock and look at what's working, what's not working, how are we going to do things? And that's what it did for me. And so I was like, well, I can't be the only one. I can't be the only one. So as necessity is the mother of invention, I went looking, before I did all that study, I went looking online because I'm a course taker. I buy courses.
Okay.
And I was like, okay, menopause help. Wait during menopause. And everything that I found I'm a doctor. I understand the medical terminology. Okay. And it was the only way I could say it is disjointed and weird. It didn't make any sense to me. I'm like, okay, somebody's got to decipher this, because if it's hard for me as a board certified surgeon, as somebody who's been through medical school and I've practiced medicine for a long, long time, if it's that hard for me, how hard can it be for somebody who doesn't have that advantage?
Mm.
And so that's when the Minnow System was born.
And it's interesting
Menopause
to me
movement.
that as a doctor, you had to ask your wife, what's going on with me, right? Like even a doctor with the medical school training and everything else it's not like we're prepared for menopause, right?
We're not.
Or, and it comes up for me all the time too. It's like even sex. Doctors, even OBs and urologists are not talking about sex and sexual function. So there's such a dearth of information.
As a doctor, I can tell you that we don't talk about sex.
Yeah.
We don't talk about sex in medical school. There's a lot of things we don't talk about in medical school. We don't talk about nutrition. We don't talk about disease prevention.
Right.
Right. And especially in America, we're in the business of disease maintenance, not disease prevention. And the reason for that is that if we prevent people from getting diseases, then what is the medical industrial complex going to do? So there's a lot of real economic issues that are involved in the way that America does medicine.
Right. So does that, you have left medicine, right?
Well, I did. I'm full-time with the menopause movement. I still licensed. I'm licensed in New York and Texas. I'm board certified as a general surgeon, and I just retired from surgery in July.
Oh, wow.
And that's not to say that I couldn't go back because I still have active licenses.
Yeah. But
at the end of the day, COVID changed a lot for medicine. And during I'm in New York, and New York got hit with the first wave, and we are really the reason why. Italy too. So I don't want to diminish what happened in Europe, but for America, it was New York.
Yeah.
And our little hospital of 130 beds had over 70 people on ventilators.
Wow.
It was a COVID hospital, and we were seeing people would go on the vent and they wouldn't come off and they just die. And it was a really demoralizing time back in April and May. I would go in and with COVID, we saw this issue with blood clotting, and now we've learned how to manage it, but we didn't then. We were shooting in the dark.
Right. Right.
And so people were having kidney failure, and they didn't have vascular access. And so I would spend the weekends just giving vascular access, giving hemodialysis access, so that we could try to keep these people alive. And it was the most demoralizing thing I'd ever seen.
Wow.
I'd go and operate on these people, and I'd be wearing 3 masks. I'm so afraid to get it because my son is immunocompromised.
Wow. And
I decided that it wasn't worth the risk. It's just not something I don't want to be exposed to that. I don't want to bring that's not to say my wife is still dealing with it, but I'm not. And we have a protocol at home. If we have to go out to the hospital, we come home, we strip in the garage, all the clothes go into a bag, immediate shower.
Yeah. So, but it also sounds a little bit like a confluence of, putting this all together around menopause, the COVID thing, and then maybe the awareness that Western medicine is disease maintenance. It just seems like maybe all this has come together to be like, okay, I'm going to do this.
Yeah. It is. There's a lot of ways we could go with this. I've come to discover that, and I don't know what your audience is like, but I've come to discover that we are truly spiritual beings having a human experience. Mm-hmm. And when I woke up to that, it was a lot easier to make decisions around how to serve my soul, how to make sure that I can help serve others' souls.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. So talk to us a little bit about menopause. I want to say symptoms, but I don't even know if I like that word. But what are the kinds of experiences that women have in menopause, especially that our experience is problematic?
Yeah. So I think when it comes to menopause, there's some broad categories that are external, and there are some broad categories that are internal.
Okay.
And for the external symptoms, the external problems, the struggles are really the symptoms like hot flashes, mood swings, sleep disturbance, weight gain. Those are the main ones, right? The mood disturbance can be one of the big ones, but by, far and away, the biggest complaint I hear from women is menopause weight. Mm-hmm. I can't get the weight off. I keep trying. I'm not changing my diet. Everything's the same. I'm exercising the same, and the weight just keeps piling on. And that has to do with how we manage, how our body manages the hormonal disturbances. And then when you don't get enough sleep, on top of that, then your body's going to try to hold weight. It's going to make you crave carbs. It's going to make you crave the things that your brain thinks it wants.
Right.
So we have that. But then we have the more internal struggles, which are my relationships are not the same as they used to be. And I feel like an alien's beamed down and taking control of my body. I don't feel like myself at all anymore. So I can't make decisions. Mm-hmm. And a lot of women in menopause just can't make decisions like they used to. And it's either a function of the brain fog or it's a function of not knowing who they are anymore. So I do believe that menopause can come with menopause can come an identity crisis. I had one. Mm-hmm. I was like, what's going on? And it was really hard for me because as a super high performer, I mean, surgeons are really high performers.
Right.
And so for me, when I was having difficulty recalling the names of anatomical markers, the names of drugs, I was like, I've got to do something about this.
Wow.
Yeah, it was disruptive.
Yeah.
It was really disruptive.
And I would imagine women are all over the map in terms of which symptoms or experiences are having to what degree, right? Like, I mean, like you said, your wife even sort of had a very mild, easy menopause, didn't look like anything, right? So that's a possibility too.
It is. And I mean, you can go to your doctor and this is the problem. I mean, the other thing that happens is that doctors can feel dismissive. Because doctors aren't trained in menopause. Even the OBGYNs aren't trained that much.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a couple problems. It's a twofold problem. The doctor doesn't have much training. We live in a patriarchal society. And so here we have this dichotomy that's going on where the doctor doesn't really know, but also thinks that he or she's dealing with a hysterical woman. And so that can make women feel very unheard during this time in their life. Mm-hmm. And I always tell women that, what are you going to do when your doctor dies? You're going to get a new one. And so if you don't, I know it's very crass, but I think it's just
I'm done. I'll never have another doctor as long as I live. Yeah.
Right. So just like any other consumable in a sense, doctors are commodity. It's unfortunate, but they are. If you're not happy with your doctor, even though you may have a relationship, there's nothing wrong with changing your doctor.
Right.
So I'd like to empower women to look at it that way. But on the other hand, women have been treated as second-class citizens ever since written language. When written language came, and there's a great book I always talk about. It's called The Alphabet versus the Goddess. If you haven't read it, you should. And it is all about what happened because all gods were female before written language. Mm-hmm. And then as written language came up, we started using the other side of our brain. The masculine took over, and all the gods were dismembered. And so there's stories of how the goddesses, not the gods, but the goddesses were dismembered by the gods and raped and things like that. And it's all because of the way, I mean, that's what it seems like. That's the dawn of the patriarchy.
I remember I read a book ages ago. It's reminding me when God was a woman. I haven't read The Alphabet and the Goddess.
The Alphabet versus the Goddess was written by a surgeon, I think an ENT surgeon. And it is the best book on religious history I've ever read.
Wow.
And it just really helped me to see the whole patriarchy from a different view, because it's easy to be angry as a woman about the patriarchy. But when all you're doing is using the side of your brain that writes and is logical, that's very masculine. Right. And when we get into the right brain, where it's free flowing and spacious, and I mean, that's what happens when we meditate. We get into that space of creativity. And especially in the Western world, we don't cherish that.
Hey, it's Jessa. I'm just taking a little break to invite you to my free monthly webinars that I do on a variety of topics that always include an open Q&A session with me at the end. I'm doing these monthly. If you want to hear about them, be invited so you can register. Make sure you join my mailing list. You can go to bettersexpodcast.com/list.
Now, I noticed when you were talking about the symptoms or the experiences, you didn't, in that first list, talk about loss of libido.
I did it because I forgot. Of course, this is the Better Sex podcast.
Right. So this is like the perfect time. Like, let's emphasize that. What?
That is a real common problem.
Yeah. How common? Do you know?
I would say, I mean, at least 30% of my audience, based on surveys, and I've surveyed at least 10,000 women by now. So, and so we do see it pretty commonly. Mm-hmm. And there are many causes loss of hormones, right? So we start with the loss of the hormones that's natural. It's supposed to happen.
Right. It's not an emergency, you know?
No, I mean, the problem is that, you know, if you think about China, for example, and some parts of Japan, but in China, they didn't even have a word for menopause until recently, because women just got older and it was no big deal. And so I think because of the way the Western medical industrial complex, menopause has become a medical condition to many people. But I like to tell people that menopause is the privilege of a long life.
Yeah.
Menopause is not a medical condition any more than stubbing your toe is, in a sense, right? It's just, and even that's a bad analogy, because
sort of the way I think about pregnancy and birth, right?
Right,
birth is a natural thing.
Right. Maybe the better way to say it, and this is one of the things I talk about in my courses, is puberty a medical condition? Because chances are, when you were going through puberty, you got sat down to have the talk, right? And somebody's going to tell you, hey, you're going to get breasts.
Right.
And
here's what's going on. Yeah.
And you're going to start bleeding and things like that. And what we don't get is a talk about menopause, because it happens as adults. It happens in secret. And because there's so much shame around bleeding every month, because it's blood and blood is gross, right? And there's so much shame around that. When that bleeding stops or becomes intermittent, we feel like we have to go through it alone. And so one of the big things is feeling lost and lonely. Mm-hmm. So on top of, you know, all the other symptoms, the internal symptoms and the external symptom of loss of libido, you know, a lot of women say, my husband thinks I went off him, and I didn't go off him. It hurts now because I don't have any lubrication, or there's, you know, the whole issue of vaginal atrophy that can happen. And it doesn't necessarily change your desire. Remember, sexuality, I'm sure you teach this, sexuality starts in your brain.
Right, right.
And if you can't get your brain worked up, it's really hard to get your genitals to follow along.
Right, right. But even if your brain is worked up, if your body's working differently than it used to, that can be very disruptive.
Right. And I think part of being a mature human is to look at sex not as a teenager would, because, you know, what is a teenager? A teenager is like a rabbit, right? I mean, all they want to do is get it on. But as mature adults, we can actually have that long simmering kind of love that maybe isn't that hot thing that'll burn out quickly, but we can talk about sexual interaction as maybe just touching my arm, or it doesn't necessarily have to involve genital touch initially. Right.
So there can be these changes. I mean, actually, we've talked about it before in the show, but would you mind defining vaginal atrophy? It's such a horrible term. You know?
So vaginal atrophy is the loss of tissue. Mm-hmm. And women who have certain hormones that are diminished can have this problem. And not only is it vaginal atrophy, you can get urethral atrophy, which is the muscle around the urethra. And that's where the urine comes out. And when that happens, then women can have a lot more UTIs, urinary tract infections. And if you're having a lot of urinary tract infections, there is a way to treat it. You have to go to the doctor, but you can get some topical testosterone that can help it. Mm-hmm. And sometimes, especially if you have really, really dry, you can get some topical estrogen or some sort of an estrogen progesterone mixture, but you have to go to a doctor for that. You can't just do that over the counter.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So people might have lowered lubrication, potentially some pain, right? More UTIs and loss of libido or diminishment of libido anyway.
Yeah. And then bleeding. Bleeding can happen with intercourse, with any sort of penetration because of the atrophy, because of the lack of lubrication, because of the loss of estrogen.
Mm. So what do we do? How do we help make it? I mean, the question we sort of have prepared for this interview is how do we help women make menopause the best time of their lives? Not just like how do we get it back, but like how do we even make it better? Like what goes into this?
Well, I think that the first thing is to understand the hormones. Then that's the first pillar of what I call the Minnow System. We've got 4 pillars of the Minnow System, and the first pillar is science, and that's hormones and what's actually happening in our bodies. And then we move on to how can we best support ourselves with diet. And I'll tell you that was probably the biggest research piece for me. It took me a few years to really understand diet. I'm not a nutritionist by any stretch of the imagination. But what I did do is I found out the things not to eat so that we won't be suffering in what we like to call minnow misery, or, got our feet stuck in the minnow muck. Or, and then the things to eat to support our menopause, especially if you don't want to take hormones. So there's ways to supplement your hormones just with certain types of foods. Those are called phytoestrogens and flavonoids and things like that. They can really help to support your metabolism. But we also have another pillar, which is movement. And without the proper types of movement, we're at risk for things like osteoporosis. And we're at risk for losing our muscle tone just from not moving our bodies. And I like to say that exercise is the fountain of youth, and we have to drink from it, and it doesn't have to hurt.
Okay.
And then the last pillar that we have in our program is, we like to call it the Minnomate way of thinking. And it's just a matter of understanding that our brain is we live our whole lives in our brain. And if we can't make our brain a happy place, then life will never be happy. And so we spend a lot of time working on that. And that's a big one.
So what could people, maybe they'll go through your program, but even however they're approaching menopause, what could people expect in terms of improvement, or like paint the picture of, I mean, I know everybody's different too, but
when it comes to menopause, there's no one size fits all answer.
Right. But like, paint a vision of happy menopause for us that, what's possible. Well,
what's possible. When I started implementing these in my life, so I started research I started research in about 2013. Okay. And I didn't start implementing anything until 2015, maybe 2014. And I had a picture that I took of myself because, we like selfies, right? And I was super happy. And it was February of 2014. And I was super happy. I'd just come back from a conference, and I put this picture up. I remember exactly when I took it, and I put it up on Facebook and said joy. And so it shows up on my Facebook.
Oh, right. Every February or whatever.
February of this year. And I went outside and I took a picture of myself, and I did the side by side. And it's crazy the difference that just these small little micro commitments that I made to myself made, because it's 50 pound difference.
Wow.
I mean, it's also hair. My hair was really long. And now I have no hair. I've combed hair.
People can't see you, but you've got buzz cut, right? So
yeah, I don't. I shaved my head. Yeah. It's just easier because I can't go to a salon or anything. Yeah. So I was able, when I put these principles into action, I was able to drop 50 pounds. I started waking up every morning and looking forward to the day. I didn't feel like there was a big heavy weight around my neck anymore. I was having a good day every day, even though shit happened. And I hope that's okay to say.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Okay. So, I mean, and the best way to say it is that every day's a great day, and sometimes there's shit to clean up. But I'm pretty much unflappable when it comes to that. There are a few things that still bother me, but for the most part, I've really grown as a human just through all these techniques that I've learned, and now I pass on through the Minnow System into the Minnow mates. And so that's been, so for me, I was happy, but my happiness was really dependent on external things. And now my happiness is really internal and really understanding that everything we need is inside of us. And that was a big one for me.
Well, you talked about, I can't remember the word you used, but it's sort of a crossroads that we can hit in menopause, right? Where a reevaluation, and is this what's working and what isn't? And, maybe we go new directions. And it seems to me a time of life where people might really fall into what they should be doing, right? What their calling is, or what's really going to bring them joy, or that maybe the kids are raised or close to it. And we can start to think about, what do I want to do with the rest of my life?
Right. I mean, I think it's a time, it really is a time of reflection for a lot of women, and a time of reinvention. Mm-hmm. I mean, look at Madonna. Madonna reinvented herself so many times, but it was at menopause when she was in her 50s. That's when she was like her sexiest. Right. And she was always sexy, but she really got sexy with the nighttime stories and things like that around 50. I mean, now she's not sexy anymore, but she's not, but to me anyway, I could be wrong. I don't want to bang on Madonna's,
right. Your sexy might be different than someone else's.
Right. Exactly. Right. Desires are very different, very different for every, different people. But when you think about it, one thing is to get away from societal norms. Mm-hmm. Society says that a woman can I say fuck?
Yes.
Okay.
Can.
All right. So there's a really great skit with Amy Schumer and Julia Louis-Dreyfus where they talk about Julia's last fuckable day.
Oh yeah. As an actress, right?
As an actress,
you can get cast as a female lead, and yes, I've seen that.
Yes, and so it's really interesting because since the whole Me Too movement, we've had a little bit more people talking out. But I was in Los Angeles in the 80s, and I thought for 5 minutes about maybe trying to be an actor. But I knew what the cost was. I just knew it. I knew that if I wanted to be an actor, I would have to go sleep with somebody I didn't want to sleep with, and I was not willing to do that.
Wow.
And everybody knew it, just nobody talked about it. And so, and when you look at the way the media has portrayed women, older women specifically, over the hill at 40, right? And then these idealized versions, like can everyone look like Angelina Jolie? I mean, she's a beautiful woman. She's a beautiful woman who's emaciated. Mm-hmm. She probably eats a salad or a piece of lettuce like once a day. I mean, I know I'm over exaggerating, but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
They're not real women. And we have to, if we want to make meaningful change in our life, we have to accept ourselves where we are. And I think that's, if your audience doesn't get anything else out of this podcast with me, is that we have to work on our own self acceptance, because there is nothing more important. Menopause, no menopause, not in menopause, still having babies. It doesn't matter. We have one body, and we have to be friendly with it, because if we're not friendly with that body, if we're not friendly with our mind, we will never, ever, ever have a happy life.
Yeah. I love that. That was a perfect, like closing thought to take this away, Yeah. So where do people find you, find the movement, the Mennow Mates, where do they go if they want to know more?
Yeah. menopausemovement.com.
Okay.
That's where you can find me. You can find we have the Menopause Movement podcast. You've been a guest on my podcast, and that was awesome. And we do have a special for your audience that is almost ready. And we have a free course, the Menopause Movement Beta, and it's by application only. But for your audience, for your listeners, they get to bypass the application process. And so we'll get that link to you as soon as it's ready. It's probably going to be a little while, but it's a great big funnel. So
yeah. Great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me. It's been great.
You've been listening to Better Sex. Please visit our website, bettersexpodcast.com, for show notes and additional episodes.
And that's a wrap for today. I really hope you enjoyed the episode. If you are enjoying the podcast, if some of this material resonates with you and you would like to make a difference and make sure that this keeps coming out in the world once a week, ongoing, there are a couple things you could do to show your appreciation. The first would be to go to iTunes and rate and review the show. That really helps us be found by new listeners when you review the show on iTunes. You can find a link at bettersexpodcast.com/iTunes. The other thing I want to invite you to consider is becoming a Patreon. For a small monthly pledge, you get some benefits. So for $2 a month, you get advance access to every single episode. For $5 a month, you get a chapter of my upcoming new book. And for $10 a month, I host quarterly get-to-know-you and question-and-answer chats over the web, and you get invited to that. I would love to have your membership in that, become part of the Better Sex family. You can find a link at bettersexpodcast.com/Patreon, which is Patreon. Again, thanks for listening. I'm glad you're here. Feel free to comment, ask questions, get in touch. I'd love to hear from listeners. Thanks.